When a routine evening turns into a shocking display of injustice, one powerful slap sets off a chain reaction that exposes corruption, topples an empire, and proves that karma always comes knocking, sometimes in under 4 minutes. In a bustling city filled with towering skyscrapers and endless traffic, the story begins in the heart of justice. Courtroom 4A Judge Evelyn Harper, a highly respected black female judge known for her sharp mind and unwavering commitment to fairness, is leaving the courthouse after a long day. Dressed impeccably in her professional attire, she carries herself with dignity despite the weight of responsibility that comes with her position. Outside, 2 rookie cops, Officers Blake and Ramirez, are patrolling the area when they spot someone who matches the description of a suspect they've been chasing. A woman wearing dark clothing and carrying a briefcase. Unaware of their error, the officers approach Judge Harper aggressively. "Ma'am, stop right there," Officer Blake shouts as he rushes toward her. Startled but composed, Judge Harper halts mid-step, turning to face them. "Is there an issue, officers?" she asks calmly. Her tone is polite yet firm, betraying no hint of fear or panic. But instead of listening, Officer Blake's temper flares. He assumes defiance on her part and raises his hand, delivering a sharp slap across her face before she can even explain herself. The crack echoes through the quiet evening air like a gunshot, leaving bystanders stunned into silence. The slap echoed through the air like a thunderclap, reverberating not just in the physical space, but also within the hearts and minds of everyone who witnessed it. Judge Evelyn Harper staggered slightly under its force, her hand instinctively rising to her stinging cheek. Her eyes widened, betraying a fleeting moment of disbelief before she quickly masked her emotions with practiced composure. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. This wasn't justice. It was an egregious violation of trust, authority, and basic human decency. Yet here she stood, the victim of a reckless act carried out by someone who had sworn to uphold the law. Officer Blake, his temper still flaring, didn't seem to notice or care about the gravity of what he'd done. His chest heaved as adrenaline coursed through him. His face flushed red from anger or perhaps guilt. He couldn't tell anymore. He barked at Judge Harper again, demanding answers without even giving her a chance to speak. "Don't play dumb with me," he growled, stepping closer, his posture aggressive. Beside him, Officer Ramirez shifted uncomfortably, glancing between his partner and the woman they had accosted. Something about the situation felt off, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. Judge Harper took a deep breath, steadying herself against the whirlwind of emotions threatening to consume her. She could feel dozens of eyes on her now, bystanders watching intently, some whispering among themselves while others reached for their phones to record the unfolding drama. The weight of those gazes pressed down on her shoulders, but instead of wilting under it, she drew strength. With deliberate calmness, she spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Officers," she began, each word measured and precise, "I am Judge Evelyn Harper. I suggest you think carefully about your next move." Her declaration hung in the air like a challenge, daring them to acknowledge the enormity of their mistake. For a split second, there was silence, a pause so profound that it seemed to stretch infinitely. Then, almost simultaneously, murmurs erupted from the crowd. One man stepped forward, pointing accusingly at the officers. "That's Judge Harper," he exclaimed, his voice rising above the din. "You just assaulted a sitting judge." Another voice joined in, this one belonging to a woman clutching her phone tightly. "She's one of the best judges in this city." The words ricocheted off the walls of the courthouse steps, amplifying the collective outrage building around them. Officer Blake froze, his bravado evaporating instantly as realization dawned upon him. His eyes darted toward Judge Harper, taking in her composed demeanor and regal bearing. Doubt crept into his mind, gnawing at the edges of his confidence. Could it be true? Was this really a judge? He glanced at Ramirez, seeking reassurance, but found none. Instead, Ramirez looked pale, his lips moving silently as if rehearsing excuses in his head. "Blake," Ramirez finally managed to choke out, his voice barely audible over the growing commotion. "Maybe we should check her ID first." But the damage was already done. Dozens of cell phones captured every detail. The raised hand, the slap, the stunned expression on Judge Harper's face. Social media timelines would soon explode with footage of the incident. Hashtags trending nationwide within minutes. Hashtag Justice for Judge Harper began circulating alongside calls for accountability and reform. People demanded answers. How could two officers, entrusted with protecting the public, commit such a blatant abuse of power? And more importantly, what would happen to them now? As the crowd closed in, some offering words of support to Judge Harper while others condemned the officers outright, she remained unflinching. Reaching into her purse, she retrieved her badge and identification card, holding them up for all to see. The metallic gleam of the badge caught the light, serving as both a shield and a reminder of her position. It was a powerful symbol, one that demanded respect, even in the face of hostility. "Officers," she repeated, her tone colder this time, sharper, "you have made a grave error tonight. I urge you to consider the consequences of your actions." Blake swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool evening breeze. Panic gripped him as he realized the full extent of his blunder. Not only had he assaulted a respected member of the judiciary, but he had done so in front of witnesses, leaving behind irrefutable evidence of his misconduct. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to escape the suffocating weight of shame and impending repercussions. But where could he run? There was no hiding from the truth, not when it had been broadcast live to thousands, possibly millions of viewers. Ramirez, meanwhile, struggled to maintain his composure. Unlike Blake, whose arrogance often blinded him to nuance, Ramirez prided himself on being level-headed. Yet tonight, he found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about policing, about justice, about right and wrong. As much as he wanted to distance himself from Blake's actions, he couldn't ignore the fact that he had stood idly by, complicit in the assault. Guilt gnawed at him, sharp and relentless, as he watched Judge Harper address the crowd with quiet authority. She didn't raise her voice, didn't resort to theatrics. Her mere presence commanded attention, forcing everyone to confront the ugliness of what had transpired. The atmosphere grew heavier with each passing second, charged with a potent mix of anger, fear, and anticipation. News vans arrived, adding to the chaos as reporters scrambled to get closer to the scene. Cameras flashed incessantly, capturing every angle, every reaction. Microphones were thrust toward Judge Harper, eager journalists shouting questions in rapid succession. "Your Honor, can you tell us what happened here?" one asked. "Do you plan to press charges against these officers?" another chimed in. Despite the barrage of inquiries, Judge Harper kept her focus, addressing the cameras with unwavering poise. "What happened here tonight is unacceptable," she stated firmly, her voice carrying far beyond the immediate vicinity thanks to the microphones amplifying her words. "No one, not even those sworn to protect us, is above the law. This incident highlights systemic issues within our institutions, issues that must be addressed if we are to ensure true justice for all." Her message resonated deeply, striking a chord with not only those present, but also countless others tuning in from afar. Social media erupted once again, this time with messages of solidarity and admiration for Judge Harper's courage and grace under pressure. Meanwhile, officers Blake and Ramirez were left grappling with the fallout of their actions. Internal affairs investigators descended upon the precinct mere moments later, armed with warrants and a list of names tied to years of corruption. Phones rang non-stop, dispatch relaying urgent updates about raids, arrests, and seizures of incriminating documents. The department's carefully constructed facade crumbled beneath the weight of exposure, revealing decades of misconduct hidden behind badges and uniforms. Blake and Ramirez became collateral damage in the larger reckoning, their careers reduced to rubble alongside the empire they served. For Blake, the descent into ruin was swift and merciless. Handcuffed and led away in disgrace, he stared blankly ahead, unable to process how drastically his life had changed in such a short span of time. His hubris had blinded him to the realities of power dynamics, leading him to believe that authority granted immunity from consequence. Now, stripped of his badge and reputation, he faced the stark truth. Justice may have been delayed, but it was never denied. Ramirez, too, bore the brunt of karma's wrath, though his quieter demeanor earned him little sympathy. Together, they embodied the fragility of unchecked power, a cautionary tale etched into the annals of history. And yet, amidst the wreckage, hope flickered faintly. Judge Harper refused to let bitterness take root, choosing instead to channel her experience into advocacy. She emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to dismantle the systems that enabled such abuses to occur. Her story served as a beacon of resilience, inspiring countless others to demand better, from their leaders, their communities, and themselves. In the end, the moment of shock gave way to something greater, a catalyst for change, a testament to the enduring power of justice. The moment Judge Evelyn Harper pulled out her badge and identification card, the air around officers Blake and Ramirez seemed to crackle with an almost supernatural energy. It was as if the universe itself had conspired to deliver justice within minutes of their reckless actions. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, more insistent, and then, just 4 minutes after the slap, a series of events unfolded so swiftly and dramatically that it felt like fate stepping in with a vengeance. First came the radios. Both officers' handheld devices buzzed incessantly, emitting urgent static-filled transmissions from dispatch. At first, they assumed it was routine chatter until one particular message cut through the noise. All units, Internal Affairs has initiated a raid at Central Precinct HQ. Multiple arrests underway. Corruption investigation ongoing. The words hit them like a freight train. Their department, the very institution they believed shielded them from accountability, was crumbling before their eyes. Blake's face paled instantly. He fumbled for his radio, trying to make sense of what he'd just heard. What does this mean? He muttered under his breath, panic rising in his chest. But Ramirez already knew. His eyes darted nervously toward the courthouse steps where Judge Harper stood tall, her presence commanding even amidst the chaos. Something about her demeanor suggested she wasn't merely a victim of circumstance. She might have been the spark that ignited this inferno. As if on cue, news vans screeched to a halt nearby, their satellite dishes unfolding like mechanical wings against the night sky. Reporters poured out, cameras rolling, microphones extended, all drawn by viral footage of the assault. One particularly sharp-eyed journalist recognized Judge Harper immediately. "That's Judge Evelyn Harper," she shouted to her crew. Within seconds, hashtags began trending online. Hashtag Justice for Judge Harper. Hashtag Police Accountability Now. Hashtag Karma's Real. Social media erupted into a firestorm, amplifying the story far beyond the courthouse grounds. But karma wasn't done yet. Before either officer could process what was happening, 2 unmarked cars skidded to a stop beside them. Men and women in plainclothes emerged, flashing badges marked Internal Affairs. They moved with purpose, surrounding Blake and Ramirez before either man could react. Officers Blake and Ramirez, one investigator announced sternly, "You're under arrest for misconduct and abuse of power. Please place your hands behind your backs." The click of handcuffs echoed ominously as the once authoritative figures were now reduced to prisoners of their own hubris. Blake struggled briefly, his voice trembling with indignation. "This is a mistake. You don't understand. We thought she was someone else." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The investigators weren't there for explanations. They were there to dismantle an entire system rotting from within. As Ramirez was led away, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Unlike Blake, who clung desperately to denial, Ramirez understood the gravity of their sins. This wasn't just about slapping a judge, it was about years of unchecked corruption finally catching up to them. Meanwhile, Judge Harper watched silently, her expression unreadable. She didn't gloat or revel in their downfall. Instead, she seemed almost sorrowful, as though she bore witness to the inevitable collapse of something broken long before tonight. Her thoughts drifted momentarily to the countless victims of similar abuses, those who hadn't been recorded, those whose cries for help went unanswered. For them, she resolved to use this moment as a turning point. Back at the precinct, chaos reigned supreme. Dozens of officers were rounded up, some dragged out in handcuffs while others resigned on the spot, unable to face the consequences of their complicity. Files upon files of incriminating evidence were seized, bribery records, falsified reports, illegal wiretaps, all meticulously catalogued over years of systemic decay. The higher-ups scrambled to distance themselves, but karma was indiscriminate. Chiefs, captains, lieutenants, all fell like dominoes in a chain reaction triggered by one reckless act. Outside the courthouse, The scene had transformed into a media circus. News anchors delivered live updates, projecting Judge Harper's image onto massive screens alongside headlines like "Judicial Assault Sparks Nationwide Outcry" and "Corrupt Empire Crumbles Overnight." Protesters gathered spontaneously, holding signs that read, "No justice, no peace," and "Abuse of power must end." The juxtaposition was striking. Here stood Judge Harper, calm and composed, flanked by supporters chanting her name, while mere feet away, Blake and Ramirez sat cuffed in separate squad cars, their faces masks of humiliation. Yet the most surreal aspect of the evening was how quickly everything unraveled. 4 short minutes, that's all it took for karma to strike with precision and ferocity. Blake and Ramirez weren't just punished for assaulting a judge. They became symbols of everything wrong with the system they represented. Their empire, built on lies and exploitation, collapsed under the weight of its own toxicity. And in its place rose a new narrative, one led by survivors, advocates, and truth seekers determined to rebuild trust and restore integrity. Judge Harper addressed the crowd later that night, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. "Tonight, we witnessed the fragility of unchecked power," she declared, pausing to let her words sink in. "But we also saw the resilience of justice. What happened here wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attack on fairness, on equality, on the principles our society claims to uphold. And when you challenge those principles, the universe has a way of responding." Her speech resonated deeply, inspiring cheers and applause from the assembled masses. Yet beneath her composed exterior, Judge Harper felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding trust required more than speeches and hashtags. It demanded action, accountability, and unwavering commitment. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, illuminated by camera flashes and smartphone screens, she found solace in knowing she wasn't alone. Millions of voices joined hers, demanding change and refusing to settle for anything less than true justice. In the end, instant karma didn't just destroy 2 officers' careers, it dismantled an entire empire. It exposed cracks in the foundation of a system designed to protect, but too often exploited to oppress. And though the scars of that night would linger, for Judge Harper, for the officers, for the community, it also planted seeds of hope. Hope that justice, however delayed, would always prevail. Hope that every slap, every abuse of power, every act of corruption would eventually meet its reckoning. And hope that stories like hers would inspire future generations to fight harder, stand taller, and never lose faith in the possibility of a better world. The fallout from that fateful night was nothing short of seismic, reverberating far beyond the courthouse steps and into the very fabric of society. What began as an isolated act of injustice, a slap delivered in haste, turned into a catalyst for sweeping change, dismantling not only the careers of officers Blake and Ramirez, but also exposing decades of systemic corruption within their department. Justice, often delayed or denied, arrived with unrelenting force, leaving no stone unturned and no perpetrator untouched. For Blake and Ramirez, justice came swiftly and mercilessly. Arrested on charges ranging from assault to misconduct under color of authority, they were paraded through the criminal justice system like specters of their former selves. Their mugshots, splashed across newspapers and social media platforms, became symbols of accountability, a stark reminder that even those sworn to uphold the law are subject to its consequences. Blake, once brash and arrogant, crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. During his trial, he attempted to justify his actions by claiming ignorance, insisting he had mistaken Judge Harper for someone else. But the viral footage told a different story, one of aggression and entitlement. The jury deliberated for less than 2 days before delivering guilty verdicts on all counts. Blake was sentenced to 5 years in prison without parole eligibility, a punishment deemed fitting given the gravity of his offense against a sitting judge. Ramirez, though quieter and seemingly more remorseful, faced similar charges. His defense team argued that he had been coerced into compliance by his partner's domineering behavior, but prosecutors countered by pointing out his failure to intervene. "Silence is complicity," the district attorney declared during closing arguments. Ultimately, Ramirez received a lighter sentence of 3 years due to his cooperation with investigators, though his reputation was irreparably tarnished. Both men entered the penal system stripped of rank, privilege, and dignity, their badge numbers now infamous footnotes in history. While Blake and Ramirez bore the brunt of immediate consequences, their arrests served as mere entry points into a much larger investigation. Internal Affairs, armed with newfound leverage and overwhelming public support, launched one of the most comprehensive probes into police corruption ever seen in modern times. Files confiscated during the raid revealed a staggering web of misconduct. Officers accepting bribes from drug cartels, falsifying evidence to secure convictions, planting weapons at crime scenes, and engaging in racial profiling with impunity. High-ranking officials who had turned a blind eye to these practices, or worse, actively participated in them, were dragged into the spotlight. Chiefs, captains, and lieutenants resigned en masse, while others faced indictments. One particularly damning piece of evidence showed text messages between senior staff discussing how to cover up incidents involving excessive force against marginalized communities. These revelations sparked national outrage, leading to protests outside police departments nationwide and calls for defunding or restructuring law enforcement agencies. Legislators scrambled to respond, drafting bills aimed at increasing transparency and accountability within policing. Body cameras became mandatory, disciplinary records were made accessible to the public, and independent oversight boards gained real power to investigate complaints. While critics argued these measures didn't go far enough, advocates hailed them as critical first steps toward meaningful reform. Amidst the chaos, Judge Evelyn Harper emerged as a beacon of resilience and moral clarity. Though she could have retreated quietly after the ordeal, she chose instead to step boldly into the limelight, using her platform to advocate for systemic change. Her speeches resonated deeply, blending personal experience with universal truths about justice, equality, and human dignity. She spoke at rallies, addressed Congress, and appeared on talk shows, always returning to the same core message: justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoers, it's about preventing future harms. Her advocacy extended beyond rhetoric. Working closely with civil rights organizations, she helped draft legislation designed to protect judges, lawyers, and other legal professionals from harassment and abuse. She championed community policing initiatives that prioritized de-escalation over confrontation and pushed for mental health resources to be integrated into emergency response systems. Her efforts earned her widespread acclaim, including prestigious awards and honorary degrees, but she remained humble, deflecting praise onto the countless activists and allies fighting alongside her. One of her proudest achievements came when President Harper, no relation, signed the Law Enforcement Accountability Act into law, a landmark bill inspired directly by the events surrounding her assault. The legislation mandated stricter penalties for police misconduct, established national databases to track problematic officers, and allocated funding for training programs focused on implicit bias and cultural sensitivity. On the day it passed, Judge Harper stood beside the president at the signing ceremony, tears glistening in her eyes as she reflected on how far they'd come since that harrowing night. The scandal marked the beginning of a new era, not just for law enforcement, but for society as a whole. Public trust in institutions hit rock bottom following the revelations, forcing leaders across sectors to reevaluate their priorities. Corporations implemented diversity and inclusion initiatives, schools introduced curricula centered around civic responsibility, and grassroots movements flourished, empowering ordinary citizens to demand better from those in power. In the judicial system specifically, reforms took root quickly. Judges began wearing body cameras during high-profile cases to ensure transparency. Courtrooms adopted live streaming technology, allowing the public to observe proceedings in real time. Legal aid organizations received unprecedented levels of funding, enabling them to provide free representation to underserved populations. Even juries underwent changes, with selection processes becoming more inclusive and representative of diverse communities. Perhaps most significantly, conversations about race, class, and privilege entered mainstream discourse in ways they never had before. People started grappling honestly with uncomfortable truths about inequality and systemic oppression, acknowledging that progress required more than platitudes, it demanded action. Social media played a crucial role in amplifying marginalized voices, creating spaces where survivors of police brutality could share their stories and find solidarity. Years later, when historians looked back on this period, they dubbed it the Harper Effect, a nod to the transformative impact of Judge Evelyn Harper's courage and conviction. Statues of her likeness dotted courthouses across the country. Murals depicted her standing tall amidst swirling winds of change, and books chronicled her journey from victim to victor. Yet despite the accolades, Judge Harper remained steadfast in her belief that true justice wasn't about individual glory, it was about collective liberation. She often reminded audiences that the work was far from finished. "We've taken important steps," she'd say at speaking engagements, "but we must remain vigilant. Systems of oppression don't dismantle themselves. They require constant effort, constant vigilance." Her words inspired a new generation of activists, many of whom credited her with igniting their passion for social justice. And so, justice was served, not merely through punishment, but through prevention, not just for one woman, but for countless others who might otherwise have been silenced. The empire built on corruption crumbled entirely, replaced by a foundation rooted in fairness, equity, and respect. In the end, what happened that night wasn't just about karma striking down two rogue officers. It was about a movement rising up to reclaim justice for all. Years passed, and the world had changed in ways that once seemed unimaginable. The events of that fateful night, the slap, the viral videos, the arrests, the systemic reckoning, became more than just a chapter in history. They evolved into a cornerstone of modern justice reform. Judge Evelyn Harper's name became synonymous with resilience, integrity, and transformational change. Yet, for all the accolades and monuments erected in her honor, she remained deeply reflective, understanding that true redemption wasn't about personal vindication, but about collective healing. The ripple effects of that single moment stretched far beyond the immediate fallout. What began as an isolated incident spiraled into a nationwide movement, forcing institutions to confront long-standing inequities. Police departments across the country implemented sweeping reforms. Body cameras became standard issue, civilian oversight boards gained real teeth, and training programs emphasized de-escalation over aggression. The Law Enforcement Accountability Act, championed by Judge Harper herself, created national databases tracking officers accused of misconduct, ensuring that problematic behavior could no longer be swept under the rug. Courthouses underwent their own transformations. Judges were required to undergo bias training, courtrooms adopted live streaming technology to promote transparency, and legal aid organizations flourished thanks to increased funding. These changes weren't perfect. They couldn't erase centuries of systemic oppression overnight, but they represented critical steps toward a fairer, more equitable system. For many, these reforms symbolized hope, proof that progress was possible when people demanded better. Society at large experienced a cultural shift as well. Conversations about race, class, and privilege entered mainstream discourse in ways they never had before. Schools introduced curricula focused on civil rights and social justice, while corporations implemented diversity initiatives aimed at fostering inclusivity. Grassroots movements flourished, empowering ordinary citizens to hold those in power accountable. Social media platforms became tools for amplifying marginalized voices, giving rise to new leaders who carried forward the torch lit by Judge Harper. For Judge Evelyn Harper, the years following the incident were a mix of triumph and introspection. While statues were erected in her likeness, murals painted her image on city walls, and books chronicled her journey from victim to victor, she remained grounded in humility. She often reminded audiences that her story wasn't unique. It was part of a larger tapestry woven by countless others who had fought tirelessly for justice. "I am not a hero," she'd say during speeches. "I am simply someone who refused to stay silent when silence would have been easier." Her advocacy work continued long after the initial headlines faded. She founded the Harper Institute for Justice Reform, a nonprofit dedicated to addressing systemic inequalities within the legal system. Through research, policy recommendations, and community outreach, the institute became a driving force behind further reforms. It also provided scholarships for aspiring lawyers from underrepresented backgrounds, ensuring that future generations of jurists reflected the diversity of the communities they served. Judge Harper's influence extended beyond legislation and activism. She became a mentor to young women, particularly black women, encouraging them to pursue careers in law and public service. Her speeches resonated deeply with audiences, blending personal anecdotes with universal truths about perseverance, courage, and the enduring power of justice. She reminded listeners that change doesn't happen overnight. It requires patience, persistence, and unwavering faith in the possibility of a better tomorrow. Despite her achievements, Judge Harper never lost sight of the scars left by that night. Physically, the redness on her cheek faded quickly, but emotionally, the sting lingered. She often thought about Officers Blake and Ramirez, not with anger or resentment, but with a profound sense of sorrow. Their downfall wasn't just a consequence of their actions. It was a symptom of a broken system that failed to guide them properly. In quiet moments, she wondered whether things might have turned out differently if they'd received better training, stronger leadership, or clearer boundaries. This perspective shaped her approach to advocacy. Rather than focusing solely on punishment, she emphasized prevention. She believed that true redemption came not from vengeance, but from education, accountability, and opportunities for growth. When asked about Blake and Ramirez during interviews, she responded thoughtfully. "They made terrible mistakes, yes, but I don't want their lives to end in prison cells. I want them, and everyone else, to learn from this experience so that we can build a society where such mistakes aren't repeated." Her philosophy resonated with many, including some surprising allies. Over time, former colleagues of Blake and Ramirez reached out to Judge Harper, expressing gratitude for her willingness to see humanity even in those who had wronged her. One retired officer admitted that her grace inspired him to volunteer at youth mentoring programs, hoping to steer teenagers away from paths of destruction. Another wrote her a letter apologizing for past biases, vowing to do better moving forward. These small acts of reconciliation reinforced her belief in the power of forgiveness and dialogue. As Judge Harper grew older, she found solace in reflection. She spent hours poring over old journals, revisiting the thoughts and emotions she'd recorded in the aftermath of the assault. Those entries reminded her how far she'd come, not just personally, but collectively as a society. She marveled at the progress achieved: fewer instances of police brutality, greater representation in positions of power, and increased awareness of systemic inequities. Yet she knew there was still work to be done. In her final public address before retiring, she stood before a packed auditorium, her voice steady despite the weight of emotion. "Justice is not a destination," she declared, echoing words she'd spoken years earlier. "It's a journey, one that requires constant vigilance, relentless effort, and boundless compassion. We've taken important steps, but our work is far from finished." She concluded with a message directed at younger generations. "You are the architects of tomorrow. Build boldly, build wisely, and above all, build with love. Remember that every act of kindness, every demand for accountability, every refusal to accept injustice brings us closer to the world we dream of creating." When Judge Evelyn Harper passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, tributes poured in from around the globe. World leaders praised her contributions to justice reform. Activists honored her legacy of courage, and everyday citizens shared stories of how she had inspired them to fight for a better future. Her gravestone bore a simple inscription: "Justice is not a gift, it's a responsibility." Her life served as a reminder that redemption isn't reserved for individuals alone. It extends to societies willing to confront their flaws and strive for improvement. The empire of corruption that crumbled that night gave way to something stronger, more resilient, and infinitely more hopeful. And though Judge Harper was gone, her spirit lived on in the countless lives touched by her example. In the end, she taught the world that justice isn't just about righting wrongs. It's about building bridges, nurturing empathy, and daring to imagine a brighter horizon.